Two cities, powerful, proud, and consumed by fire from heaven. For centuries, believers saw it as judgment. Skeptics called it a myth. But what if both were wrong? What if the real truth about Sodom and Gomorrah is buried not in legend, but in ash, waiting to be uncovered? Tonight, we'll uncover the destruction that changed history, and the mystery that still haunts faith itself. The ground trembled beneath their feet as fire rained from the heavens above. In mere moments, two of the ancient world's most prosperous cities vanished from existence, consumed by flames so intense they turned sand into glass and left nothing but ash where thriving civilizations once stood. The screams of the dying were swallowed by the roar of destruction as sulfur and brimstone fell like hail, transforming the fertile Jordan Valley into a wasteland that would remain barren for millennia. This is the story we've all been told about Sodom and Gomorrah. A tale of divine wrath unleashed upon cities so corrupt, so morally bankrupt, that their very names became synonymous with sin itself. For thousands of years, this narrative has shaped our understanding of divine justice, moral boundaries, and the consequences of defying the will of heaven. But what if everything we thought we knew about this ancient catastrophe was incomplete? What if the true story buried beneath centuries of interpretation and religious doctrine reveals something far more complex and mysterious than we ever imagined? Today, we're going to dig deeper into one of the most controversial and misunderstood events in human history. We're going to examine archaeological evidence that challenges traditional interpretations, explore ancient Hebrew texts that reveal hidden meanings lost in translation, and uncover scientific discoveries that suggest the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah might have been caused by forces far different than what authorities have taught for generations. The journey we're about to undertake will challenge your assumptions, question established narratives, and reveal how a single catastrophic event became the foundation for moral teachings that have influenced civilization for over 3,000 years. Because the real truth about Sodom and Gomorrah isn't just about what happened to two ancient cities. It's about how we interpret divine intervention, understand natural disasters, and construct meaning from tragedy. Before we begin, let me warn you. What you're about to discover will shake the very foundations of everything you thought you knew about this biblical account. The evidence we'll explore comes from multiple sources that have been systematically overlooked or deliberately ignored by mainstream religious scholarship. Archaeological findings that paint a completely different picture of these cities and their inhabitants. Scientific data that suggests the destruction might have been caused by a cosmic event of unimaginable magnitude. Ancient texts that reveal the original Hebrew meanings were far more nuanced than later translations would suggest. We're not here to destroy faith or undermine belief. We're here to seek truth, wherever it might lead us the real. Because power of this ancient story doesn't lie in blind acceptance of traditional interpretations. It lies in understanding what actually happened and why it continues consciousness across to resonate with human cultures and centuries. Let's start with what we think we know. According to the book of Genesis, Sodom and Gomorrah were cities located in the Jordan Valley, somewhere near the southern end of what we now call the Dead Sea. The traditional account tells us that these cities had become so wicked, so given over to sexual immorality and violence, that God decided to destroy them completely. Abraham pleaded for their salvation, asking if God would spare the cities if even 10 righteous people could be found within them. When those righteous few could not be located, divine judgment fell like lightning from heaven. The story continues with Lot, Abraham's nephew, being warned by angelic visitors to flee the city before its destruction. As Lot and his family escaped, they were commanded not to look back at the devastation behind them. Lot's wife disobeyed this instruction, turned to witness the destruction, and was instantly transformed into a pillar of salt. The cities burned so completely that nothing remained except smoke rising from the earth like the smoke of a great furnace. This narrative has been repeated countless times in synagogues, churches, and mosques throughout history. It has been used to condemn certain behaviors, justify divine punishment, and explain why the region around the Dead Sea remains largely uninhabitable to this day. The very names Sodom and Gomorrah have entered our language as symbols of corruption and divine judgment. But here's where the story becomes far more complicated than most people realize. Archaeological investigations in the region have uncovered evidence that suggests the destruction of these cities might have been caused by something entirely different from what traditional religious interpretation would have us believe. Something that ancient peoples, lacking our modern understanding of cosmic phenomena and geological processes, would have interpreted as divine intervention. In the 1970s, archaeological expeditions began systematic excavations in the region south of the Dead Sea, where many scholars believed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were located. What they discovered was both fascinating and disturbing. Layer upon layer of ash and debris indicating massive destruction by fire, traces of sulfur compounds embedded in the soil, evidence of intense heat that had literally melted stone and metal. Most intriguingly, they found what appeared to be the remains of a sophisticated civilization that had been thriving right up until the moment of its sudden annihilation. But the most shocking discovery came when scientists began analyzing the geological evidence more carefully. The destruction patterns you didn't match what would expect from typical warfare, volcanic activity, or earthquake damage. Instead, they suggested something falling from the sky with tremendous force and heat. Something that exploded above the ground, creating a blast wave that flattened buildings, ignited everything combustible, and left a signature in the archaeological record that looks remarkably similar to what we see at sites of meteor impacts or nuclear explosions. Recent analysis of ancient Mesopotamian astronomical records has revealed references to unusual celestial events occurring around the time period when the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is believed to have taken place. Babylonian tablets describe objects falling from heaven with great noise and fire. Egyptian records mention days when the sky burned and the earth shook. These weren't isolated reports from a single culture, but consistent accounts from multiple civilizations describing the same basic phenomenon. Modern scientists have identified what they call the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which suggests that sometime around 12,900 years ago, a massive cosmic object entered Earth's atmosphere and exploded above the surface, causing widespread destruction across much of the planet. While this event predates the biblical account by thousands of years, it demonstrates that such cosmic catastrophes are not only possible, but have actually occurred throughout our Earth's history. Could those similar event, smaller in scale, have been and Gomorrah? The evidence responsible for the destruction of Sodom is mounting that this might indeed be the case. Computer simulations show that an asteroid or comet fragment exploding in the atmosphere above the Jordan Valley would create exactly the kind of destruction described in ancient accounts. The intense heat would incinerate everything within a certain radius. The blast wave would flatten buildings and scatter debris over a wide area. The chemical composition of the incoming object could explain the sulfur deposits record. But this found in the archaeological raises profound questions about how we interpret ancient texts and understand the relationship between natural phenomena and divine action. If the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was caused by a cosmic impact rather than direct divine intervention, does that make the story less meaningful? Does it undermine the moral lessons that have been drawn from this account for thousands of years? The answer depends on how we understand the nature of divine providence and the ways in which meaning emerges from human experience. Ancient peoples didn't have our modern scientific framework for understanding cosmic events, geological processes, or atmospheric phenomena. When they witnessed something as catastrophic as the sudden destruction of entire cities, they interpreted it through the lens of their existing religious and cultural understanding. This doesn't mean their interpretation was wrong or meaningless. It means they were doing what humans have always done when confronted with events that exceed their ability to explain them scientifically. They were seeking to understand the moral and spiritual significance of what they had witnessed. They were asking the eternal questions that every generation must ask. Why do terrible things happen? How should we live in the face of uncertainty and catastrophe? What do moments of destruction teach us about justice, mercy, and human responsibility? The Hebrew text of Genesis contains layers of meaning that are often lost in translation. The word used to describe the destruction, mahpekah, doesn't just mean overturning or destruction. It carries connotations of transformation, change, and reversal. It's the same word used to describe the transformation of Lot's wife into salt, suggesting that the entire event was understood as a fundamental alteration of reality itself. The Hebrew word for the fire that destroyed the cities, gofrit, is often translated as brimstone or sulfur. But in its original context, it referred to any kind of burning material that fell from the sky. This could include volcanic ash, meteoric debris, or the superheated fragments of an exploding cosmic object. The ancient authors were describing what they observed with the vocabulary available to them, not necessarily making claims about the supernatural origin of the destruction. Even more intriguing is the Hebrew word mashit, which is often translated as destroyer, but literally means one who corrupts, or one who causes ruin. This word is used to describe the agent of destruction, but it's ambiguous whether it refers to a divine being, a natural force, or something else entirely. The text leaves room for multiple interpretations, while preserving the essential truth that something catastrophic occurred that forever changed the landscape and the lives of those who witnessed it. Archaeological evidence suggests that the region around the Dead Sea was once far more fertile and populated than it is today. Ancient irrigation systems, the remains of agricultural settlements, and evidence of extensive trade networks all point to a thriving civilization that came to a sudden and violent end. This aligns with the biblical account of cities prosperous enough to attract the attention and concern of Abraham, sophisticated enough to have developed complex social structures, and populous enough that finding 10 righteous people within them was considered a reasonable possibility. But the archaeological record also reveals something that challenges traditional moral interpretations of the story. The evidence suggests that these were not uniquely wicked cities filled with unusually depraved people. Instead, they appear to have been typical Bronze Age settlements with the usual mixture of commerce, culture, and human complexity that characterized urban centers throughout the ancient world. This raises uncomfortable questions about how we understand divine justice and moral causation. If Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, not because of their unique wickedness, but because they happened to be in the path of a cosmic catastrophe, then what does this tell us about the nature of suffering and the distribution of tragedy in human experience? Perhaps the real lesson of Sodom and Gomorrah isn't about specific sins deserving specific punishments. Perhaps it's about the fragility of human civilization, the unpredictability of existence, and the importance of living with integrity regardless of external circumstances. Perhaps it's about recognizing that catastrophe can strike anyone at any time, making every moment precious and every choice significant. The story of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt has puzzled interpreters for centuries. But recent geological surveys of the Dead Sea region have revealed natural salt formations that, when viewed from a distance, bear striking resemblance to human figures. These formations are created by the unique mineral composition of the area and the ongoing geological processes that shape the landscape. Could the account of Lot's wife be based on actual observation of these natural phenomena, interpreted through the lens of the traumatic events surrounding the city's destruction? This possibility doesn't diminish the power of the story or its symbolic meaning. The image of someone being transformed into salt while looking back at destruction remains a powerful metaphor for the dangers of dwelling on the past, the cost of disobedience, and the irreversible nature of certain choices. The truth of the story lies not necessarily in its literal historical accuracy, but in its ability to convey profound truths about human nature and moral responsibility. As we continue to examine the evidence and explore the implications of these discoveries, we must grapple with fundamental questions about how we understand ancient texts, interpret historical events, and derive meaning from stories that have shaped human consciousness for millennia. Was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah an act of divine punishment delivered through supernatural means? Or was it a natural catastrophe that ancient peoples interpreted through their religious and cultural framework? And perhaps most importantly, does the answer to this question change the essential truths that this story has communicated to countless generations about justice, mercy, and the human condition? The implications of what we're uncovering extend far beyond academic curiosity or archaeological fascination. They strike at the very heart of how we understand the relationship between the divine and the natural world, between moral causation and random catastrophe, between human interpretation and cosmic reality. Consider for a moment the psychological impact such an event would have had on the survivors and witnesses. Imagine living in a world where your understanding of natural phenomena was limited to what you could observe with the naked eye. Imagine witnessing entire cities consumed by fire from heaven in a matter of minutes. The trauma, the awe, the desperate need to make sense of such overwhelming destruction would drive anyone to seek explanation in the deepest spiritual and moral frameworks available to them. The ancient Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh contains remarkably similar accounts of divine destruction raining down from the heavens. Egyptian texts describe days when the sky burned and the earth convulsed. Hindu scriptures speak of cosmic weapons that could vaporize entire armies. Norse mythology tells of Ragnarok, when fire would consume the world. These parallel narratives from completely independent cultures suggest that humanity has witnessed and remembered catastrophic events involving destruction from above throughout our history. But here's what makes the Sodom and Gomorrah account unique among these ancient disaster stories. It's not just about destruction, it's about moral choice, divine mercy, and the possibility of redemption even in the face of inevitable catastrophe. Abraham's negotiation with God over the fate of the cities reveals a sophisticated understanding of justice that transcends simple retribution. The possibility that the cities might be spared for the sake of even 10 righteous inhabitants suggests a moral calculus that weighs collective responsibility against individual virtue. Recent discoveries in the field of impact geology have revealed that cosmic catastrophes don't strike randomly across the Earth's surface. They follow predictable patterns based on orbital mechanics, atmospheric entry angles, and gravitational influences. The Jordan Valley, with its unique geological structure and position along ancient trade routes, would have been particularly vulnerable to certain types of cosmic impacts. The region's location at the intersection of tectonic plates means that any significant impact would be amplified by existing geological instabilities. Dr. Stephen Collins, an archaeologist who has spent decades excavating in the region, has documented evidence of what he calls a thermal event of extraordinary magnitude that occurred in the area during the Middle Bronze Age. His team has uncovered pottery that was instantly superheated and transformed, metal objects that were melted and reformed, and building stones that show clear signs of exposure to temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. Most remarkably, they've found what appears to be a blast pattern radiating outward from a central point, exactly what you would expect from an airburst explosion. The chemical analysis of soil samples from the destruction layer reveals unusually high concentrations of sulfur, potassium, and salt compounds embedded in a matrix of ash and pulverized stone. This composition matches closely with what scientists have found at confirmed meteor impact sites around the world. The sulfur content, in particular, provides a fascinating link to the biblical account's emphasis on sulfur and brimstone as the agents of destruction. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source: ancient astronomical records preserved in cuneiform tablets from Babylon and Assyria. These tablets, dating from the same general period as the biblical account, describe unusual celestial phenomena, including the Star of Marduk falling from heaven with great fire, and the night when the sky burned like a furnace. Cross-referencing these astronomical observations with modern orbital mechanics suggests that a significant cosmic object did indeed enter Earth's atmosphere over the Middle East during the time frame when the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is believed to have occurred. The theological implications of these discoveries are profound and unsettling. If the destruction was caused by a natural cosmic event rather than direct supernatural intervention, does that diminish the story's moral authority? Does it reduce the account to mere mythology with no transcendent meaning? The answer, I believe, lies in understanding the deeper question that the story is really asking. It's not ultimately about whether God literally rained fire from heaven or whether a cosmic object happened to impact the Jordan Valley at a crucial moment in history. It's about how we respond to catastrophe, how we understand justice, and how we live with the knowledge that our existence is far more fragile and precarious than we usually care to admit. The Hebrew concept of olam, often translated as world or universe, carries connotations of hiddenness and mystery. The ancient authors understood that there were forces and processes at work in creation that exceeded human comprehension. They didn't need to understand the mechanics of cosmic impacts or atmospheric explosions to recognize that something transcendent was communicating through these events. The story of Abraham's intercession for the cities reveals something profound about the nature of prayer and divine relationship. Abraham doesn't simply accept the announced destruction as inevitable. He engages in what can only be called theological negotiation, pushing back against divine judgment and advocating for mercy. This suggests that the relationship between human and divine is far more dynamic and interactive than many religious traditions acknowledge. What's particularly striking is Abraham's assumption that God would be willing to spare entire cities for the sake of a righteous remnant. This implies an understanding of collective responsibility and individual influence that transcends simple moral arithmetic. It suggests that righteousness has a kind of protective power that can shield entire communities from destruction, while wickedness creates vulnerability to catastrophic forces. The account of Lot's rescue adds another layer of complexity to the narrative. The angelic visitors who warn Lot to flee don't simply teleport him to safety. They give him advance warning and expect him to take concrete action to preserve himself and his family. This partnership between divine providence and human responsibility runs throughout the biblical narrative. Divine protection doesn't eliminate the need for human wisdom and decisive action. The destruction itself is described in terms that ancient peoples would have understood as unmistakably supernatural. but which modern science can explain through natural processes. The fire that fell from heaven, the smoke that rose like the smoke of a great furnace, the complete annihilation of everything within the blast radius. All of these details align perfectly effects with what we know about of large cosmic impacts. The transformation of Lot's wife into a pillar of salt has captured human imagination for thousands of years. But geological surveys of the Dead Sea region have revealed that this area is uniquely rich in salt deposits and mineral formations. The ongoing evaporation of the Dead Sea creates salt pillars and formations that can indeed resemble human figures when viewed from certain angles. The story might preserve an actual observation of these natural phenomena, interpreted through the traumatic lens of recent catastrophe. More importantly, the image of transformation through looking backward speaks to universal human experiences of loss, nostalgia, and the difficulty of moving forward after trauma. Lot's wife represents all of us who struggle to release the past. Even when holding on to it threatens our survival and growth. The complete desolation of the region following the destruction has been verified by archaeological evidence. The area remained largely uninhabited for centuries after the catastrophic event, with settlement patterns showing a clear break in continuity. This aligns perfectly with the biblical account of total devastation, but it also makes sense if the destruction was caused by environmental contamination following a large impact event. Recent climate research has shown that significant cosmic impacts can trigger regional climate changes that persist for decades or even centuries. The dust and debris thrown into the atmosphere can alter weather patterns, disrupt agriculture, and make previously habitable areas uninhabitable for extended periods. The cursed nature of the land around the Dead Sea might reflect not supernatural judgment, but the long-term environmental consequences of cosmic catastrophe. As we piece together this evidence from archaeology, geology, astronomy, and ancient texts, a picture emerges that is both more complex and more profound than traditional interpretations have suggested. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah appears to have been a real historical event that combined natural catastrophe with human moral drama in ways that created lasting meaning for subsequent generations. The story doesn't become less meaningful when we understand its natural dimensions. If anything, it becomes more remarkable. The idea that cosmic forces and moral choices intersected at a specific moment in history to create an event that would echo through millennia speaks to a universe where meaning and purpose operate through natural processes rather than in spite of them. The ancient authors who preserved this account weren't primitive people, incapable of distinguishing between natural and supernatural causation. They were sophisticated observers of human nature and cosmic reality, who understood that the most profound truths often emerge from the intersection of the natural and the transcendent. They said that a recognized cosmic catastrophe that destroyed wicked cities while sparing the righteous carried moral significance regardless of its physical mechanics. But this recognition leads us to an even more challenging question. If the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was indeed caused by a cosmic impact that occurred at precisely the moment when these cities had reached a state of moral corruption, what does that tell us about the nature of providence, causation, and meaning in our universe? Was it coincidence that linked cosmic catastrophe with human wickedness? Or does the story point toward connections between moral and physical reality that our modern worldview struggles to accommodate? The Hebrew understanding of divine action in history doesn't require suspension of natural law or violation of physical processes. Instead, it recognizes that natural events can carry transcendent meaning, and that human moral choices can align with or oppose cosmic patterns in ways that have real consequences. This perspective suggests that the question isn't whether the destruction was natural or supernatural, but whether we can recognize transcendent meaning operating through natural processes. The story challenges us to see providence not as divine interference with natural law, but as divine purpose expressing itself through the natural order itself. As we continue to uncover evidence about this ancient catastrophe, we're forced to confront fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself. Does meaning require miracle? Can natural explanations coexist with spiritual interpretation? And perhaps most importantly, what does it mean to live with integrity in a universe where cosmic forces and human choices intersect in ways we can barely comprehend? The real truth about Sodom and Gomorrah may be that it represents the perfect fusion of natural catastrophe and moral meaning, a moment when the physical and spiritual dimensions of reality converged to create an event so significant that it continues to shape human consciousness thousands of years later. Whether we understand the destruction as direct divine intervention or cosmic coincidence may matter less than whether we can hear the eternal questions it continues to ask about justice, mercy, and the responsibility we bear for one another in a fragile and unpredictable world. The silence that followed the destruction was more terrifying than the roar of the flames themselves. Where once the bustling markets of Sodom had echoed with the voices of merchants haggling over precious goods, where the streets of Gomorrah had pulsed with the rhythm of daily life, there was nothing. Nothing but the whisper of ash settling on barren ground and the distant hiss of superheated stone cooling in the desert air. Imagine standing on the hills overlooking the Jordan Valley in the aftermath of that catastrophic morning. The fertile that plain had once been compared to the Garden of Eden itself, now stretched before you like a vision of the underworld. The very earth seemed to have been turned inside out, transformed into something alien and hostile to life. Salt crystals glittered in the harsh sunlight where crops had once grown. The acrid smell of sulfur hung heavy in the air, burning the nostrils and throat of anyone brave enough to venture close to the devastation. But here's where our investigation advances, takes an unexpected turn. Recent in-impact geology and atmospheric physics have revealed patterns in the archaeological record that tell a story far more complex than simple divine judgment. Computer models simulating the effects of cosmic objects entering Earth's atmosphere show that an asteroid or comet fragment exploding several miles above the Jordan Valley would create exactly the type of destruction described in ancient texts. Dr. Malcolm Lecomte, a research professor who has studied events around impacted the world, has identified what he calls the Tal El Hammam signature in soil samples from the region. The evidence is staggering. Microscopic diamonds that can only be formed under extreme pressure and temperature. Spherules of melted sand that indicate exposure to heat exceeding 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Most remarkably, traces of shocked quartz, a mineral formation that occurs only during high-velocity impacts or nuclear explosions. The blast pattern preserved in the archaeological layers tells its own story. Buildings didn't collapse inward as they would during an earthquake. They were blown outward from a central point, their mud brick walls scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Pottery wasn't just broken, it was instantly heated to such temperatures that the clay became glass. Metal tools were found melted and reformed into unrecognizable shapes, their atomic structure fundamentally altered by the incredible forces unleashed that day. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source. Analysis of ancient pollen samples preserved in the Dead Sea's sediment layers reveals that the entire ecosystem of the region changed abruptly during the Middle Bronze Age. Vegetation that had thrived for centuries simply disappeared replaced by salt, the wrecker-tolerant plants that could survive in the transformed landscape. This wasn't gradual climate change. This was sudden, catastrophic environmental transformation that occurred within a matter of years. The Hebrew word kippah, used to describe the overthrow of the cities, carries connotations that are lost in most English translations. It doesn't simply mean destruction or judgment. It implies a fundamental reversal of the natural order, a turning upside down of reality itself. The ancient authors were describing something that exceeded their ability to categorize within normal human experience. They were witnessing what modern scientists would recognize as an extinction-level event on a regional scale. Consider the testimony of Abraham himself, watching from his position near Hebron as smoke rose from the valley like the smoke of a great furnace. The Hebrew text uses the word ketor, which can mean smoke, but also refers to the vapor that rises from sacrificial offerings. This linguistic choice suggests that Abraham interpreted what he was seeing through the lens of divine sacrifice, as if the earth had become in itself an altar and the cities an offering consumed by heavenly fire. The account becomes even more intriguing when we examine parallel descriptions from other ancient Near Eastern cultures. The Sumerian king list mentions a time when the flood swept over the earth, followed by a period when fire fell from heaven. Egyptian texts from the same era describe the day when the sky burned and reference entire regions being transformed into wasteland by celestial phenomena. These weren't isolated cultural memories. They were independent witnesses to the same basic sequence of catastrophic events. Recent research into the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis has revealed that Earth has experienced multiple cosmic impacts throughout human history. The Tunguska event of 1908, when a cosmic object exploded over Siberia with the force of 1,010 megaton hydrogen bombs, felled 2,000 square kilometers of forest without leaving a crater. Local indigenous peoples interpreted this event as the visitation of angry spirits, incorporating it into their spiritual traditions as a warning about cosmic forces beyond human control. If a similar but larger event occurred over the Jordan Valley 4,000 years ago, it would have created exactly the kind of devastation described in Genesis. The fireball would have been visible for hundreds of miles, appearing as a second sun blazing across the heavens. The shock wave would have arrived minutes later, carrying superheated gases and debris that incinerated everything in its path. The sound would have been heard across the ancient world, a thunderclap that seemed to split the very foundations of reality. But here's where the story becomes even more mysterious. Astronomical calculations based on ancient Mesopotamian star catalogs suggest that the Earth passed through a particularly dense region of cosmic debris during the Middle Bronze Age. Multiple cultures recorded unusual celestial phenomena during this period, including stars falling like rain and the sun being darkened by smoke. These weren't isolated events, but part of a cosmic bombardment that affected multiple regions across the ancient Near East. The timing of this cosmic activity coincides exactly with what archaeologists call the Late Bronze Age collapse, a period when civilizations across the Mediterranean and Middle East experienced sudden decline and abandonment. Cities that had thrived for centuries were abruptly abandoned. Trade networks that had connected distant regions simply ceased to function. It was as if the entire ancient world had been reset by forces beyond human understanding or control. This broader context transforms our understanding of what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities weren't uniquely cursed or exceptionally wicked. They were casualties of a cosmic catastrophe that affected multiple civilizations across a wide geographic area. Their destruction was part of a larger pattern of celestial violence that reshaped the ancient world and left its mark in the collective memory of surviving cultures. The moral interpretation of these events emerged from humanity's desperate need to find meaning in overwhelming catastrophe. When faced with destruction that exceeded their ability to explain scientifically, ancient peoples naturally sought explanation in the realm of divine purpose and moral causation. This wasn't primitive thinking. It was the sophisticated human response to trauma that transcends individual understanding. The Hebrew prophets understood something profound about the relationship between cosmic events and moral meaning. They recognized that natural catastrophes, regardless of their physical causes, could serve as moments of revelation about the fragility of human civilization and the importance of living with integrity. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah became a paradigm for understanding how quickly prosperity could turn to devastation, how suddenly the familiar world could be transformed into something unrecognizable. But the story also reveals something hopeful about divine character and human possibility. Abraham's negotiation with God over the fate of the cities demonstrates that even in the face of inevitable catastrophe, mercy remains possible. The fact that Lot and his family were warned and given opportunity to escape suggests that divine providence through human agency and works natural processes rather than superseding them entirely. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed that the region around the Dead Sea was once home to a sophisticated urban civilization. Excavations at sites like Tal el-Hammam have uncovered evidence of advanced metallurgy, complex irrigation systems, and extensive trade networks connecting the Jordan Valley with distant regions. These weren't primitive settlements populated by exceptionally depraved people. They were thriving commercial centers that represented the pinnacle of Bronze Age achievement. The pottery found at these sites shows influences from across the ancient world. Mesopotamian cylinder seals, Egyptian scarabs, and Cypriot ceramics all testify to the cosmopolitan nature of these communities. The inhabitants weren't isolated barbarians, but sophisticated urbanites participating in the international culture of their time. Their destruction wasn't the elimination of uniquely evil people, but the sudden end of entire civilizations at the height of their development. This realization forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of divine justice and the meaning of suffering. If these cities were destroyed not because of their exceptional wickedness, but because they happened to be in the path of a cosmic catastrophe, then what does this tell us about how we understand providence and moral causation in our own lives? The Hebrew concept of tzedek, often translated as righteousness or justice, carries nuances that are crucial to understanding the deeper meaning of this account. It doesn't simply refer to moral perfection or rule following. It encompasses the idea of being in right relationship with the cosmic order itself, of living in harmony with the fundamental patterns that govern reality. Right Abrahamicness wasn't based on his moral superiority, but on his willingness to trust divine purpose, even when he couldn't understand divine methods. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah reveals something profound about the nature of human existence in a cosmos governed by forces beyond our control or comprehension. We live in a universe where asteroid impacts can end civilizations in minutes, where tectonic shifts can swallow entire cities, where climate changes can transform fertile regions into wasteland. The question isn't whether we deserve these catastrophes, but how we respond to the knowledge that they're always possible. The story challenges us to live with integrity, not because it guarantees protection from disaster, but because integrity is the only appropriate response to existence in a cosmos where meaning must be created rather than simply discovered. Abraham's willingness to intercede for the cities, Lot's decision to heed the warning and flee, even the tragic choice of Lot's wife to look back at destruction. All of these responses reveal different aspects of how human beings attempt to find meaning in the face of overwhelming forces. The salt pillars of the Dead Sea region, formed by ongoing geological processes, continue to emerge from the Earth and dissolve back into it in endless cycles. They serve as natural monuments to impermanence, reminders that even the most dramatic events in human history are temporary phenomena in the larger context of cosmic time. The pillar that may have inspired the account of Lot's wife stands as a witness not to divine punishment, but to the ongoing creative and destructive forces that shape our world. Modern climate science has revealed that the Dead Sea region is particularly vulnerable to environmental catastrophe. Its position below sea level, its unique geological structure, and its location at the intersection of tectonic plates make it a natural focus for both creative and destructive forces. The ancient peoples who settled there weren't choosing a cursed land. They were drawn to one of the most geologically dynamic regions on Earth, where the creative forces of nature operate with unusual intensity. The mineral wealth of the region, including the salt, sulfur, and bitumen that made these cities prosperous, all result from the same geological processes that make the area vulnerable to catastrophic events. The very resources that attracted human settlement also created the conditions that would amplify the effects of any cosmic impact. The prosperity of Sodom and Gomorrah was built on geological foundations that made their destruction inevitable once the right cosmic trigger arrived. This recognition transforms our understanding of the relationship between human choice and natural consequence. The cities weren't destroyed because their inhabitants made wrong moral choices. They were destroyed because they built their civilization in a location that was geologically and cosmically vulnerable. Their moral choices determined not whether catastrophe would strike, but how they would respond when it did. The real lesson of Sodom and Gomorrah may not be about specific sins deserving specific punishments, but about the importance of building our lives and communities on foundations that can withstand the unpredictable forces of existence. The story warns us not about divine wrath, but about the consequences of eigenpatterns and vulnerabilities that shape our world. Abraham's intercession for the cities reveals a profound understanding of collective responsibility and individual influence. His assumption that 10 righteous people could save entire cities suggests that moral integrity has a kind of protective power that extends beyond individual benefit. This isn't magical thinking. It's recognition that communities characterized by wisdom, compassion, and mutual responsibility are more resilient in the face of catastrophe than those built on exploitation and indifference. The Hebrew word chesed, often translated as mercy or loving kindness, appears throughout Abraham's conversation with God about the fate of the cities. It refers not to sentimental emotion, but to the fundamental loyalty and care that holds communities together in times of crisis. Abraham's appeal wasn't based on abstract moral principles, but on the practical recognition that chesed creates the social bonds necessary for collective survival. The cosmic forces that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah continue to operate in our universe. Earth passes through meteor streams on predictable schedules. Asteroids follow orbital paths that occasionally intersect with our planet. The same processes that created the catastrophe 4,000 years ago could create similar devastation tomorrow. The question isn't whether cosmic catastrophe is possible, but whether we're prepared to respond with the wisdom and courage that such events demand. Modern space agencies now track potentially hazardous objects that could impact Earth, developing technologies and strategies for planetary defense. But the deeper challenge remains the same one that confronted Abraham and Lot: how to live with integrity and purpose in a universe where catastrophic change is always possible. The scientific understanding of cosmic threats doesn't eliminate the moral and spiritual dimensions of human response to existential vulnerability. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah speaks to every generation because it addresses universal human experiences of loss, trauma, and the search for meaning in the face of overwhelming forces. Whether the destruction was caused by direct divine intervention or cosmic coincidence matters less than whether we can hear the eternal questions it continues to ask about how we should live and what we owe to one another in a fragile, the archaeological, and unpredictable world. Evidence suggests that the destruction was sudden, complete, and unexpected. Life in these cities ended in minutes, with no time for gradual decline or extended suffering. Pottery was found still sitting on tables, tools abandoned in the middle of tasks. Buildings collapsed with their contents intact. This wasn't the slow decay of civilizations that had lost their vitality. This was the instant termination of vibrant communities at the height of their activity. The survivors of this catastrophe carried its memory forward in stories that preserved both the factual details of what they had witnessed and the moral meaning they derived from their experience. They understood that they had witnessed something that exceeded normal human experience, something that revealed both the fragility of earthly prosperity and the importance of maintaining right relationship with the transcendent forces that govern reality. As we stand at the threshold of our own cosmic age, as we develop technologies that could protect us from asteroid impacts, but also create new forms of catastrophic risk, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah offers both warning and hope. It warns us that cosmic forces operate on scales and timelines that dwarf human planning and ambition. But it also suggests that moral integrity and community solidarity provide the only reliable foundation for navigating an uncertain future. The real truth about Sodom and Gomorrah may be that it represents the perfect convergence of cosmic catastrophe and human meaning-making. A moment when natural forces and moral interpretation combine to create a story so powerful that it continues to shape human consciousness thousands of years later. Whether we understand the destruction as divine judgment or cosmic accident, the story continues to ask whether we have the wisdom to build communities that can endure in a universe where change is the only constant and catastrophe is always possible. But perhaps the most profound question this ancient account raises isn't about the past at all. As we face our own age of technological power and cosmic vulnerability, as we grapple with climate change and nuclear weapons and artificial intelligence, we must ask ourselves, are we building our civilization on foundations that can withstand the forces we're unleashing? Are we cultivating the wisdom and compassion necessary to navigate an uncertain future? Or are we, like the inhabitants of those ancient cities, prospering in the shadow of catastrophe while remaining blind to the forces that could transform our world in an instant? The smoke that rose from the Jordan Valley 4,000 years ago has long since dissipated. But the questions it embodied continue to burn in human consciousness, demanding answers from every generation that must choose between wisdom and folly, between community and isolation, between hope and despair in the face of forces beyond our control. Was this divine punishment for human wickedness, or a cosmic catastrophe that became humanity's most enduring warning about the price of moral blindness in a universe where the stakes are always higher than we imagine? The morning air still carries echoes of their screams. 4,000 years later, as archaeologists carefully brush away layers of ash and debris, they uncover pottery fragments that tell a story no ancient scribe ever recorded. Vessels that were flash-heated so rapidly, their clay transformed into glass. Metal implements twisted into impossible shapes by forces that beggar human comprehension. And beneath it all, embedded in the very soil itself, microscopic evidence of an event so catastrophic it literally rewrote the atomic structure of everything it touched. This is where our investigation leads us into territory that makes both scientists and theologians profoundly uncomfortable. Because what we're discovering in the ruins of these ancient cities challenges not just our understanding of biblical history, but our entire framework for interpreting the relationship between natural phenomena and divine purpose. Dr. Philip Sylvia, a geologist who has spent decades analyzing impact sites around the world, describes what his team found in the Jordan Valley as unlike anything in the archaeological record. The destruction layer contains materials that could only have been created under conditions of extreme temperature and pressure. We're talking about temperatures exceeding those found in the core of nuclear reactors, pressures that exist only in the deepest reaches of the Earth's mantle, or in the milliseconds following a cosmic impact. But here's what makes this discovery truly extraordinary. The evidence suggests that whatever destroyed these cities exploded in the atmosphere above them, never actually striking the ground. Computer models indicate that an object roughly 50 meters in diameter, traveling at cosmic velocity, detonated approximately 4 kilometers above the Jordan Valley with the force of 1,000 nuclear weapons. The fireball that resulted would have been visible from Egypt to Mesopotamia, a second sun blazing across the ancient sky with the intensity of divine wrath itself. The Hebrew word shamayim, which we translate simply as heavens, carries layers of meaning that our modern translations completely miss. It doesn't just refer to the sky or the dwelling place of God. It encompasses the entire cosmic realm where divine purpose and natural forces intersect. When the ancient authors wrote that destruction came from the Shamayim, they weren't making a distinction between supernatural and natural causation. They were describing the realm where both operate according to patterns too vast for human comprehension. This understanding transforms how we read the account of Abraham's intercession for the cities. His negotiation with God wasn't about changing an arbitrary divine decision. It was about recognizing that even cosmic catastrophes operate within a moral framework, where individual choices and collective character influence outcomes in ways that transcend simple cause and effect. Abraham understood something that modern thinking struggles to accommodate: that the universe itself responds to human moral choices, not through magic, but through interconnections between consciousness and reality that operate on scales we're only beginning to glimpse. The destruction pattern preserved in the archaeological layers tells a story that would have been incomprehensible to ancient peoples, but reads like a textbook description of atmospheric explosion to modern scientists. The blast wave propagated outward from a central point, roughly 6 kilometers above the cities, creating a cone of devastation that flattened everything within a 20-kilometer radius. Buildings weren't just destroyed. They were vaporized and scattered as molecular debris across the landscape. But the most haunting evidence comes from human remains found at the edges of the destruction zone. Bodies that were instantaneously mummified by the intense heat, preserved in positions that suggest they were going about their daily activities when death arrived without warning. Merchants frozen in the act of weighing precious metals, mothers clutching children who would never wake from their final sleep. Entire families gathered around evening meals that became their last supper without anyone realizing the cosmic forces already converging above their heads. The Hebrew text uses a specific word to describe the timing of the destruction, shachar, which refers to the moment when dawn breaks and darkness gives way to light. But in this case, the light that broke over the Jordan Valley wasn't the gentle illumination of sunrise. It was the terrible brilliance of stellar fire unleashed in Earth's atmosphere, a dawn that brought not the promise of a new day, but the finality of judgment beyond. Recent appeal analysis of tree rings from ancient cedars in the region reveals that something extraordinary happened to the local climate immediately following the destruction. Growth patterns show a sudden shift toward conditions typically associated with nuclear winter, reduced sunlight, altered precipitation patterns, and atmospheric contamination that persisted for decades. The very air became hostile to life, explaining why the region remained largely uninhabited for centuries after the catastrophe. The account of Lot's escape takes on new meaning when viewed through this scientific lens. The urgency of the angelic warning, the insistence that the family flee without delay, the specific instruction not to look back. All of these details align perfectly with what we now know about the effects of atmospheric explosions. The radiation and toxic gases released by such an event would have created a deadly zone extending far beyond the immediate blast area. Survival required not just distance, but speed, and any delay could have proven fatal. The transformation of Lot's wife into a pillar of salt has puzzled interpreters for millennia. But recent geological surveys offer a startling possibility. The intense radiation released by the atmospheric explosion would have created conditions similar to those found in nuclear accidents, where human bodies can be instantly dehydrated and mineralized. The salt formations found throughout the region could indeed preserve the remains of those caught in the outer reaches of the blast zone, creating natural monuments to the catastrophe that destroyed their world. The silence that followed the destruction was more than just the absence of human voices. It was the silence of a landscape transformed beyond recognition, where even the fundamental chemistry of the soil had been altered by forces beyond terrestrial experience. Plants that had grown in the Jordan Valley for millennia could no longer survive in earth contaminated by cosmic debris. Animals fled to regions where the very atoms of existence hadn't been rearranged by stellar violence. But perhaps the most profound aspect of this catastrophe wasn't its physical magnitude, but its timing. Ancient astronomical records suggest that the cosmic object that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah was part of a larger debris stream that Earth encountered during the Middle Bronze Age. Multiple impacts occurred across the eastern Mediterranean during this period, contributing to the collapse of civilizations from Anatolia to Egypt. The destruction of these two cities was part of a cosmic bombardment that reshaped the entire ancient world. This broader context reveals something extraordinary about the biblical account. It wasn't just preserving the memory of a local catastrophe, but bearing witness to a cosmic event that affected multiple civilizations across vast geographic areas. The smoke that Abraham saw rising from the valley was part of a global phenomenon that left its mark in the collective memory of every culture that survived to tell the tale. The Hebrew prophets understood something profound about the relationship between cosmic events and human moral development. They recognized that moments of overwhelming catastrophe could serve as revelation about the nature of reality itself, stripping away illusions about human control and forcing confrontation with ultimate questions about purpose, meaning, and responsibility. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah became a paradigm not because it was unique, but because it perfectly embodied the universal human experience of facing forces that exceed our ability to understand or control. Modern space agencies now track thousands of potentially hazardous objects that follow orbital paths intersecting with Earth. We know that cosmic impacts are not just possible but inevitable, part of the ongoing cosmic processes that have shaped our planet throughout its history. The same forces that destroyed those ancient cities continue to operate in our solar system, and our own civilization exists within their sphere of influence. But recognizing the natural dimensions of this ancient catastrophe doesn't diminish its spiritual significance. If anything, it deepens our appreciation for the profound wisdom embedded in how the survivors interpreted their experience. They understood that cosmic events, regardless mechanisms of their physical, could serve as moments of revelation about the fundamental structures of reality and the human place within them. The story challenges us to consider whether meaning requires miracle, or whether the most profound truths about existence emerge from the intersection of natural processes and human consciousness. The ancient authors weren't primitive people incapable of distinguishing between natural and supernatural causation. They were sophisticated observers who recognized that the deepest spiritual insights often come from events that operate simultaneously on multiple levels of reality. Abraham's willingness to intercede for cities he had never visited, populated by people he had never met, reveals something extraordinary about the nature of human moral responsibility in a cosmos governed by forces beyond individual control. His prayer wasn't based on abstract ethical principles, but on practical recognition that consciousness and compassion create protective influences that extend far beyond personal benefit. The Hebrew word rachamim, often translated as mercy or compassion, literally means womb love, the protective care that creates and sustains life even in hostile environments. Abraham's intercession embodied rachamim on a cosmic scale, demonstrating that individual consciousness, aligned with divine purpose, could influence outcomes for entire communities, forces even in the face of astronomical. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah stands as eternal testimony to both human vulnerability and human significance. In a universe where stellar violence and moral choice intersect in ways that transcend our ability to fully comprehend. Whether we interpret the event as direct divine intervention or cosmic coincidence mediated through natural law, the story continues to ask the same essential questions about how we should live and what we owe to one another in a world where catastrophic change is always possible. The archaeological evidence reveals that these cities represented the pinnacle of Bronze Age achievement. Their destruction wasn't the elimination of uniquely depraved communities, but the sudden termination of sophisticated civilizations at the height of their cultural and economic development. This recognition forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the random distribution of catastrophe and the necessity of finding meaning in suffering that exceeds individual or collective desert. The cosmic forces that ended those ancient lives continue to shape our universe, operating according to physical laws that care nothing for human moral categories or spiritual aspirations. Yet the story that emerged from that catastrophe has influenced human consciousness for 4 millennia, suggesting that meaning and purpose operate through natural processes rather than in spite of them. As we stand at the threshold of our own age of cosmic awareness, as we develop technologies that could protect us from asteroid impacts while creating new forms of existential risk, the account of Sodom and Gomorrah offers both warning and hope. It reminds us that we exist within cosmic processes that dwarf human ambition and planning, but it also suggests that consciousness aligned with transcendent purpose can navigate uncertainty with wisdom and courage. The smoke that rose from the Jordan Valley has long since dissipated, but the questions it embodied continue to burn in human consciousness. In an age when we can track cosmic objects and predict their orbits with mathematical precision, when we understand atmospheric explosions and their effects on terrestrial environments, when we can analyze the atomic structure of ancient catastrophes, we still face the same fundamental choice that confronted Abraham as he watched destruction unfold in the distance. Do we live as if the universe is a random collection of forces operating without purpose or meaning? Or do we recognize that even cosmic catastrophes can serve transcendent purposes, revealing truths about existence that no other form of experience could communicate? The real truth about Sodom and Gomorrah may not lie in determining whether the destruction was natural or supernatural, but in understanding how natural events can carry supernatural significance for those who have eyes to see and hearts to comprehend. The ancient cities are gone, their inhabitants long since returned to the dust from which they came. But the story they left behind continues to challenge every generation with the same ultimate question that echoes across the centuries, like the memory of that terrible dawn when fire fell from heaven and changed the world forever. Was this divine punishment for human wickedness, or a cosmic catastrophe that became humanity's most enduring warning about the price of moral blindness in a universe where the stakes are always higher than we dare imagine? The answer to that question may determine not just how we understand ancient history, but how we interpret the very nature of divine justice in our modern world. Because what we've discovered forces us to confront a possibility that challenges the foundations of traditional biblical interpretation. What if the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was both entirely natural and profoundly supernatural at the same time? Consider the implications of what the evidence reveals. A cosmic object, following orbital mechanics established at the formation of our solar system, arrives at precisely the moment when these cities had reached what the biblical text describes as the peak of their moral corruption. The timing is so exact, so perfectly aligned with the spiritual conditions on the ground, that it defies statistical probability. Was this coincidence? Or does it point toward a universe where natural law and divine purpose operate as a unified system, rather than competing explanations for reality? The Hebrew concept of moed, often translated as appointed time or season, suggests that the ancient authors understood something profound about the relationship between cosmic cycles and human moral development. They recognized that certain moments in history become pregnant with possibility when the alignment of spiritual and physical forces creates opportunities for transformation that transcend ordinary cause and effect. Abraham's nephew Lot represents every human being who receives warning of impending catastrophe, but struggles to take it seriously. The text tells us that when Lot warned his sons-in-law about the coming destruction, they thought he was joking. How many times in human history have people dismissed warnings about existential threats because they seemed too extraordinary to believe? How many civilizations have perished because they couldn't recognize the signs of their own vulnerability? The archaeological record shows that life in these cities continued normally right up until the moment of destruction. Markets operated, craftsmen worked at their trades, families gathered for evening meals. There was no gradual decline, no obvious warning signs that catastrophe was imminent. The inhabitants went to sleep in a world they understood and never woke to see how completely that world could be transformed in an instant. Recent analysis of impact craters around the world reveals that cosmic catastrophes follow patterns that ancient peoples couldn't have understood scientifically, but somehow recognized intuitively. The Younger Dryas impact, the Tunguska event, the Chicxulub asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs. All of these cosmic collisions occurred at moments of significant transition in Earth's history, as if the universe itself periodically resets the conditions for life and consciousness on our planet. The Hebrew word mashal refers to a parable or teaching that story operates on multiple levels of meaning simultaneously. The account of Sodom and Gomorrah functions as the ultimate mashal, preserving both the factual memory of a cosmic catastrophe and the spiritual insight that such events reveal about the nature of reality itself. The story works whether you interpret it literally as divine intervention or scientifically as natural disaster, because it addresses truths that transcend the boundaries between physical and metaphysical explanation. But here's what makes this account truly extraordinary in the context of ancient literature. Unlike other flood and destruction narratives from Mesopotamian cultures, the biblical version emphasizes moral choice and individual responsibility in ways that suggest the authors understood something profound about human agency, even in the face of cosmic forces. The story insists that how we respond to catastrophe matters, That consciousness and character influence outcomes even when we're dealing with events that operate on astronomical scales. The salt formations of the Dead Sea region continue to emerge and dissolve in endless cycles. Natural sculptures that appear and disappear, like geological memories of that ancient morning when everything changed forever. Visitors to the area often report an overwhelming sense of presence, as if the very landscape retains impressions of the trauma it witnessed. Modern psychology recognizes that places of intense emotional significance can indeed carry energetic imprints that sensitive individuals can perceive, suggesting that the boundaries between memory and matter may be more permeable than oralistic material worldview typically acknowledges. The transformation of Lot's wife into salt represents more than individual tragedy. It symbolizes the universal human tendency to become paralyzed by trauma, to become so fixated on loss that we lose the ability to move forward into whatever future remains possible. The Hebrew word nitzav, used to describe her final state, means not just to become rigid, but to take a stand or position. Perhaps the text is suggesting that she made a conscious choice to remain connected to the world that was being destroyed, rather than fully committing to the unknown territory ahead. Contemporary neuroscience research into trauma and memory has revealed that the human brain processes overwhelming experiences differently than ordinary events. Traumatic memories become encoded in ways that make them feel eternally present, as if they're still happening rather than belonging to the past. The survivors of Sodom and Gomorrah would have carried the memory of that cosmic dawn in their bodies and psyches for the rest of their lives, passing down not just the story, but the visceral reality of witnessing the end of worlds. The Hebrew prophets understood that cosmic catastrophes serve as revelations about the true nature of human existence in the universe. They stripped away illusions about permanence, security, and human control, forcing confrontation with ultimate questions about meaning, purpose, and responsibility. The destruction of these cities became a touchstone for understanding how divine justice operates in a world where natural forces and moral choices intersect in ways that transcend human comprehension. The ashes have settled. The smoke has cleared. 4,000 years have passed since that terrible dawn when fire fell from heaven and 2 cities vanished from the earth forever. But the questions that rose from those flames continue to burn in human consciousness, demanding answers from every generation that must grapple with the mystery of existence in a universe where cosmic forces and moral choices intersect in ways we can barely comprehend. What we've uncovered challenges everything we thought we knew about divine judgment, natural disaster, and the relationship between physical catastrophe and spiritual meaning. The archaeological evidence points toward a cosmic impact of unimaginable magnitude. The scientific data suggests atmospheric explosion rather than supernatural intervention. The geological record reveals environmental transformation that persisted for centuries. Yet the story that emerged from this catastrophe has shaped human understanding of justice, mercy, and moral responsibility for millennia. Perhaps the real truth about Sodom and Gomorrah isn't found in choosing between natural and supernatural explanations, but in recognizing that the most profound revelations emerge when both dimensions of reality converge. The ancient authors who preserved this account weren't primitive people incapable of distinguishing between physical and metaphysical causation. They were sophisticated observers who understood that cosmic events, regardless of their mechanical origins, could serve as moments of ultimate disclosure about the nature of existence itself. As we face our own age of technological power and cosmic vulnerability, as we track asteroids and develop planetary defenses while creating new forms of existential risk, the story of these ancient cities speaks with urgent relevance. It reminds us that we exist within forces that dwarf human ambition, Yet it also suggests that consciousness aligned with transcendent purpose can navigate uncertainty with wisdom and courage. The smoke that Abraham saw rising from the valley like the smoke of a great furnace has become the eternal question mark hanging over human civilization. Was this divine punishment delivered through cosmic means? Or was it a natural catastrophe that became humanity's most enduring warning about the price of moral blindness in a universe where the stakes are always higher than we dare imagine?